Well, I'd like to welcome everybody out tonight to the Kane County Water Forum. We'd like to thank the following for their participation. So let me get a few words out. It'll take a few minutes just kind of explain the process and everything else. Then I'll get into the substance of things tonight. So tonight we'd like to thank the Kanab Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting the forum, Kanab Middle School for providing a place for us to meet, Principal Bateman, Gabe Ms. Glover for accommodating us. Even though they're not able to participate, Kanab City, the Kane County Water Conservancy, Best Friends Animal Society, providing speakers, and our law enforcement officers in the back for all things base.
So tonight I was asked to come and provide an update as to where we are in our study with helping Best Friends Animal Society try to determine what they have for a water situation and how they might be impacted. So this is kind of a progress report, and we're still a work in progress. So here's where we are so far. Let's try the next slide, please. So the purpose is they're worried about, of course, a new water well that's going to be at the Southern Red Sands mine site. So we have an approach, it's called a HESA approach, where we, first of all, try and determine what the hydrologic system really looks like. And in that case, we're also trying to determine basically the boundaries of what this hydrologic system may be. And this is an objective approach. We then, once we determine what that system is, we try and come up with a water budget and how much water is stored in the system. And then we try and figure out the impacts of future water users, or what have you, in this case the SRS water well development, as to whether it might impact the hydrologic system, the water budget, the water storage for Best Friends. This method, by the way, has been developed over 30 years of research, and basically and we've been applying it for the last 20 years to various municipalities, counties, cities. One of my other clients, for example, is the city of Moab. So basically, our whole purpose is to try and determine what's there, and then try and advise the entity as to what they have. Let's try the next slide, please. Most of you probably have been in this area. I see the word Kanab down there. You can see where you're sitting right now, in fact. Best Friends is now nicknamed BFAS. You can see that in the middle, and that's Kanab Canyon, Kanab Creek, going up Kanab Canyon there to the White Cliffs. You can see the Three Lakes side there where the Highway 89 goes up through the Sand Hills, and then we also have the Sitla parcel of the Red Sands mine outlined right there. So this became the area that we looked at, and of course we looked at a broader area and then narrowed it down to what our system could actually look like. So there's a few interesting features in the area just to show you. I'm sure most of you have been out in the field. Next slide, please. But of course, this is one of the features on there. This is Big Lake, which is sitting with Best Friends, which is spring fed. Of course, this is a concern to them. Next slide, please. The Three Lakes area, as you go by on 89 on your way up towards Mount Carmel Junction, and over to Zion. Most of you have seen this, I'm sure. These are various lakes that are spring fed and are of interest to Best Friends and other people. Let's try the next slide, please. And of course, there's Kanab Creek proper. And this is Kanab Creek right before it goes under the bridge, where 89 crosses it and then goes up the side canyon. And this is an interesting site because right here is the gauge that is on Kanab Creek, and that becomes important to determining the water budget because there's not a whole lot of engineering data. And this is one piece that is very important. So this is on US Highway 89. Let's try the next slide, please. So we'll jump right in. We won't go into how we got here. Of course, reading all literature, and of course, I forced them to extensively take me out to the field because that's the heart of finding out what's there, is to actually walk on the ground and see what's there. And going through the analysis, and most of the literature supports this, these are the hydrogeologic units that are of concern. Notice there's two kinds. We have the unconsolidated materials, Most of you locally know them as either valley alluvium or you know it as wind deposits or sand dunes, what have you. And they're both very interesting hydrogeologic units and have a story. And then there's the bedrock units, and rather than go through the whole list, these are the ones that are most pertinent to where best friends are. And actually the city of Kanab wells are. That's the Upper Navajo Aquifer, the Land Point Ton, the Navajo Land Point Ton aquifers. And then there's some what we call lower permeability units, mostly Kayenta or Kayenta-Tenny Canyon for what we're dealing with, and the Carmel up on top. So these are the conduits or the confining layers, if you like, of what we have to deal with. And so we're going to have a story to tell about these. Let's try the next slide, please. Very important to this system, and this is very important to a lot of southern Utah. Actually, it's important to a lot of areas out in the western U.S., and that is what we call the hydrostructure units. And what these are usually large cracks that are in the earth. They can be faults, formerly mapped by geologists. They can be fractures, which geologists don't necessarily map because they don't have the vertical or horizontal movement that makes them happy. But for those of you who have ever had a root grow underneath your sidewalk and you watch your sidewalk crack because the root was underneath it, that would be a fracture. Anyway, these are very important, and we're going to find in our system that Kanab Creek Canyon is one, as is Three Lakes Canyon, and some of the other features you see listed up there. Frequently, these are what we call French drains. For those of you who have a house or a construction site and you're trying to drain water out of it, you all know what a French drain is. You dig a ditch around it, you fill it up with rocks, and it takes the water away from your property and moves it to your neighbors. Anyway, that's supposed to be a joke. I can't hear if you're laughing or not with earphones, but anyway, that's what happens here in suburban Golden. Anyway, we also have, that's the north-south features. We also have east-west trending features, which become very important. Turns out these are open, what we call it, and they promote groundwater flow. And there's the list of some of the ones that are in our area that are very important. For example, the West Fork, Three Lakes drainage, Cave Lakes, canyon drainages, Big Lake. Those are all a product of fracture zones, and these are important because water tends to collect towards them and move along them. So these zones are open and they tend to promote groundwater flow. So the next time you drive up 89 and you start looking at these side canyons, you take a look at it as if you were French drains, because that's what these basically are doing. Let's try the next slide, please. So, jumping ahead, we won't bore you with the analysis tonight, but then we go ahead and put all these hydrogeologic and hydrostructure zones together on, in this case, a sub-region area, which includes Best Friends and includes the mine site, but it also includes Kanab, and it also includes the Seward Fault, and a few other things. And what you notice on this particular thing, without boring you with the legend on the left, is the greenish color is basically the Navajo aquifer we're going to be dealing with here. And the little light beige color, which is right near the square box, are the sand dunes. And the square box, of course, is the SRS site right there. And then if you come over to the right of that straight line that goes straight up is Kanab Creek, and that's the Kanab Creek hydrostructure right there. And then to the left of that, you can see the red structure there. That's the fault that is controlling the Three Lakes Canyon area where 89 gets up. So those are some of the features that we'll come back to again and again. But we spatially put it out like this, so we see how the whole thing is distributed. Let's try the next slide, please. Let me know if I'm going too fast. What's interesting is after we put these out here is if we put the hydrogeologic and hydrostructural units with springs and wells, it doesn't take very long for you to realize that most of these hydrostructures have all the springs and wells that are along them. So that's telling you where the water tends to be flowing and where the water tends to be collecting, and it tends to be also where you get your highest yields. And so there's no surprise that the purple dots there are the wells, and some of them are the wells of the city, by the way, and then you see the green dots in there, those are the springs. Okay? And so you can see these hydrostructures are very active. If you look to the west, over to the left of the SRS site, that's the Sevier Fault, and you can see there's a whole series of wells that are all along that as well. Now, all these wells may not be producing, I might add, but this is what's in the database that's out there. Okay, so let's try the next slide, please. So we go through our analysis, and we try and put together how this whole thing works. And the whole thing works, we call it a hydrologic system, not just surface water. This is groundwater and surface water combined. And what we try and do is we try and pretend that we're a drop of water. And let's say as a drop of water we fall onto the landscape. Where and what are we going to do and where are we going to go? And so what we see here is a series of little black arrows. And this is where the water has managed to get through into the geologic and hydrogeologic units, the beige being the sand, the green being the Navajo Formation, the upper Navajo aquifer, in fact. And we can see that the little black dots, the little black arrows are telling us the general, and this is very general, but the general flow based on a variety of analysis we do. Note how the large purple arrows are telling us where the French drains are. So they are telling us where the groundwater, if it can, will tend to collect and flow along those, or they can flow up those, or they can flow down those. So a whole lot could be happening there, but they're open conduits nonetheless. What you will notice is the black arrows tend to point to the purple arrows, because the purple arrows, being the fracture zone, are very transmissive. They can flow water very easily through them, so it's going to attract water from surrounding areas. So if we want to follow a flow line, for example, if we take a look at the SRS site, the square right there, and let's say on the south side of it, right on the bottom side, right, notice how the water there is going to flow right into the West Fork fracture, West Fork Three Lakes fracture zone, and it's going to go down that way. If we take a look at the flow line off of the arrow to the east of SRS, I'll go back to the square there. Go back to the square, please. There you go. And you look at that arrow. Out of the east, it's going to straight. Some of it's going to stay up on top, and then some of it's going to head to the West Fork of Three Lakes area. Finally, if the water flows off to the north of that, which we think some does, it will tend to curve around, and some of that may actually get all the way over to the Big Lake area. So you follow that, and those set of arrows over into that next purple arrow right in there. And that's where the Big Lakes area is. So this is the reason why Best Friends was concerned, and we were too, is because on the initial analysis, it looks like flow lines, which means water that originates at SRS, would tend to go to these three locations. Note how we don't have any flow arrows going to the west. And this is the hypothesis that the USGS has been following, and we can't find any springs or anything that tells us a whole lot of water is flowing west in this uppermost unit. Most of it is blocked. That's actually a blocking fault, and so most of the recharge water is going to be flowing to the east and to the southeast and northeast. Recharge area then is the whole area. The discharge area are all those little blue dots you see in there, because those are all the springs, and then of course Canab Creek, which is the large pull line running down the middle, that is also a discharge zone too. So this gives you an idea how the whole water system works in this area. So the next question becomes, is this a local system or is this a regional system? How does this all work? And of course the literature suggests it's a local system, but ahead of that, we wanted to do our own independent analysis. So let's try the next slide, please. But before we do that, we're going to draw some cross sections so you can see how water actually flows here. It's in groundwater and surface water. So first we'll talk about AA prime briefly, and then we'll move to BB prime, at least the west side, and we'll see how it works. And notice we chose AA prime because it goes from the site right to the West Fork Three Lakes area, which is where the city of Kanab's wells are, and then it cuts across the flow line right over to the Best Friends. Well, it goes to Three Lakes, and then it goes over to Best Friends Springs. So that was a concern. And then BB prime we chose, of course, because if water was flowing along that flow path, it would eventually go to Big Lake and would come out in the springs there. Both of those, of course, supplying Canab Creek with water. So let's try the next slide. Start with AA prime. And this is a cartoon. This is, we could argue about precision on this, but the thing to really look at is, you notice the blue dotted line is the water table. And the little triangles tell me where the top of the water table is. And eventually, we're going to call this pre-development. Right now, let's just call it the hydrologic system as if no development is going to occur. And you can see that blue dotted line as it moves to the east, to the right. Notice it does not go to the west. It's blocked. It goes to the east. And the first thing you see is that spring. See the little spring right there, right below the QES. A little bit to your left, a little more right there. See the little spring there? That little water spout is a spring. That's the spring that you see on the west fork of Three Lakes, and that actually is flowing. At least it was when we saw it. It has phreatophytes, water-loving plants. You know, it's cottonwoods, among other things. And we have this cottonwoods drawn there. And it's showing you the cottonwoods are basically evapotranspiring water. Cottonwoods are incredible wells. Oops, you went ahead. You want to go back? There you go. Thanks. All right, and it shows also that blue dotted line becomes a water table. See that in the actual alluvium. And that's why we call the aquifer the Upper Navajo Aquifer / Quaternary Alluvium Aquifer, because the two are joined. They become one there. And then as you come down to the right of that arrow, just a little bit further, there's a spring right there. And that's there because the Three Lakes Kane Fault is actually a block. And so it's forcing water to come up to the surface and discharge, and hence the lakes, and hence the springs that are all along there. That's where Highway 89 is, right there in the QEL. Notice the system keeps going, however. The flow line keeps going to the right of that, all the way over to Best Friends. And that gets to their springs, and eventually gets into water into Canal Creek. So that's what the shallow aquifer is doing along AA prime. Right below that, you see something called JNL, right there, and it has these funny little dots, these little circles in it. That's telling you that GNL is already becoming part of the regional system at this point, and that's water that's flowing from where you're sitting into the page. Okay? So that water is actually going in a different direction than the water that's up above. That's the way the USGS looks at it as well, by the way, and that's how they model it, and I think they're correct. And so, therefore, that's the other system that may be a source of water. But for Best Friends, we're mostly concerned about that upper system, the JN, or the Upper Navajo. Okay? Let's try the next section there. Next slide, please. Here's BB prime, and this is a little bit further away. But you see, again, there's recharge coming in. And the recharge comes through the sand, and that's very important. It turns out the sand promotes recharge more than if it was just bedrock. If we actually remove that sand, you'd actually get a higher runoff of water and lesser recharge at that point, which means that water table there would probably drop. But at this point, the water table is reasonably high. And you can see as we go to the right along that dotted blue line, there's our spring right above the Big Lake discharge zone. There's the spring. It's where the water comes out. And we've advised Best Friends to put a monitoring device in there so they can keep track of that. And they should also keep track of their lake right there, because that's part of the discharge zone along that flow line. And that, of course, feeds right into Canal Creek. So if anything happens to that, Canal Creek is also going to be compromised as well. Okay, so that's BB problem. Let's try the next slide, please. I only show this one briefly because this is CC prime, and we're basically going down Canal Creek. We're up there on the north to the right. Come down to the south to the left, you'll see the upper part of Canal Creek is dotted blue. And that's because it's ephemeral. It only flows when there's an event. And the truth is, when there's an event coming down there, it will actually send water into the groundwater system as recharge. And you can see that's the RQAL. And you can see the recharge then goes into that system right there. That's the Navajo again. And that's the beginning of the regional system. This is pretty important because that little curve right there where he's pointing is going to be the boundary condition of our system. Everything to the right is going to be regional. Everything to the left is going to be local. And that system could have some sort of movement, right or left, except for that we get a spring right there by Red Canyon. And that spring is pretty consistent, and it's also been claimed. So therefore, we have a pretty good perennial stream from there all the way down the canal. That's where your perennial stream starts. Starts right there, it goes all the way down to your town. So that's interesting because it tells us a groundwater divide, we call it, between a regional system to the east, to the north or right, or a local system to the left. Okay? Also notice down below it, J and L, there's a confining unit, and we come down to J and L. That is the regional system of the other Navajo unit down below that, and that is also moving to the north. This is the way the USGS has modeled it, and it's, I think, fairly accurate. So it just shows you how it goes. And for our water balance that we're going to talk about later, yeah, right where your arrow is, that's where the alluvium carries the shallow system down to you folks in town, whereas the alluvium is losing, it's a losing stream into that regional system, and it recharges it. So that's a big recharge zone right there. You call it lost water, and it's hard to see how much is recharging it versus the ET, or the evapotranspiration that's going on there by the cottonwoods. So you've got all sorts of things going on, and we won't deal with this cross-section much anymore, but I wanted to show you the regional system versus the local system. Okay, let's try the next slide. Okay, so at this particular point then, we had to establish the boundary conditions. This is now what we're calling phase 2. We can go back, there you go. And so we've taken everything we've learned, we've drawn this boundary, and this boundary is, of course, not just based on happenstance. The northern boundary is based on the groundwater divide. All right, that's actually a groundwater divide where most of the groundwater is going north, and the only surface water coming in is right where the arrow is, right where Canal Creek is coming in. That's surface water that could potentially come into our system as the water budget, but otherwise, that's going to be what we call the no-flow boundary. Now, we've taken that groundwater divide all the way around, until we get down to the far south, right there. And right there, we picked that boundary because that's the only gauge we have. So that's the only engineering data we have that we can actually calibrate against. And so we have that there. And you notice it's already outside our aquifer, in the deep aquifer, so we had to do some water budget analysis there to help us out. Come on the west side, and we can see that is now the surface water boundary, but that is not the groundwater boundary. The groundwater boundary actually goes out to the fault zone right there. So we got a special little piece there where we have groundwater that is actually moving into our watershed, right there. And then the rest of that is all surface water and groundwater working together. So that's how we select our boundary conditions to try and come up with what a water budget might look like. So we go to the next slide. And here is how we look at it when we set it up as a water budget. And this is a tool we use because several reasons. One, this gives us an idea how much water is in our system. Two, if we go on to a modeling stance, which we are, but we're not anywhere through with that, this gives us the boundary conditions of what our groundwater model and surface water model would look like. And so where you see no flow, that is the groundwater divide and the watershed divide as where we are at. Notice how we can't ignore Canal Creek, that arrow up there on the north where it says surface water inflow right there. Because at that particular point, when you get a flash flood or anything like that, that is water we deliver to your system. It's coming on in right there. That's its portal. Groundwater we know is going north, but surface water can come in right there. Otherwise, we're no flow all the way around until we get down. There's a few minor deviations, but there's pretty much no flow all around until the surface water out right there. And that's where the gauge is the surface water out, and that tells us what's coming out. So we have that gauge. Now, what's really interesting in this that I want you to see is those pink areas are the well protection zones of the city of Kanab, as well as of Best Friends and other users. Okay. Note how it's totally in our watershed groundwater basin. That's what's important. Okay. So what it's really telling us is what happens to Best Friends is going to happen also to the city of Kanab, and it's also going to happen to SRS. We're all in this together, right? We're all a family. And so this is what defines us in this case right here. Okay? So very interesting that you see how we chose these conditions. Let's try the next slide, please. So part of what we have to do is we have to figure out recharge. And without going into details, this is that same area, and we've classified the recharge based on the materials that are there, as well as the amount of precipitation that is entering into the system, among other variables. This is a complicated process, but the thing to note, first of all, you see where the red sand's mine's going to be, right there. You see where BFAS is down there, okay? And then if you see where it says Three Lakes Canyon, right at the front of the three up the West Fork, that's where all the city of Kanab wells are, among others. They have wells all along in there, but they're all in there, right? So that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. What you want to take out this one here is where you see something pink, where it says deep sand on the JN matrix, the pink colors, right there between Red Canyon and West Fork. These are going to be our strongest recharge zones because the sand is promoting the recharge from the surface into the groundwater. We also have to be careful because these may be the areas that are mined in the future, and that might be a different function then because that will change the recharge regime. But in the meantime, they are the highest recharge zones. The other high recharge zones are in yellow. You see the areas in yellow? We call these the dry wash. Whenever we get flash floods or anything coming down the dry washes, they're what we call line recharge in modeling. Basically, it's an easy way to get water into our system because water is running off from the storm and is moving into the crack, directly recharging the system around it. So the yellow areas and the pink areas are our highest recharge. Now, the dark maroon colored ones are still good recharge. They're just not as strong as the pink. They may be a percentage less, and we will spare all that tonight. But they're also recharge areas too. So basically, we have recharge in the entire system. The whole thing is there until we get down to the greens, down to there. And there's a variety of things. If you see what is called the QAL, which is where those graphite are in there. Again, the QAL that's in the bottom of the drainage there. That's actually one of our aquifers, and that could be a recharge or a discharge zone, depending. And then the darker green right there, that's a vent on the next system on down, so that's a whole different story. But what you want to take home from this one is we do have a recharge function. In spite of the fact we're in semi-arid terrain, we can get a decent recharge out of the system. So, and that's what keeps the system flowing, it keeps the springs going, it keeps the wells functioning. Okay, let's try the next slide, please. I won't bore you with all the numbers on this one here, and this is something that if you want to scrutinize this, you want to talk with best friends and others about that. But this is the ins and outs to the water thing and the water budget, and let me just go over a couple of the critical ones you really want to look at. If you look at the ins, on the ends, notice the highest ones. The first highest one is recharge to your system, right there, 7587 acre feet per year. That's a pretty good number for that system that we're dealing with. If you look at the inner flow, the next number up, that's the water that falls on your system that goes out. Okay, so that you don't have benefit unless you put in a reservoir or something like that to force artificial recharge. Most engineers call that basically a runoff number or a flood routing number if you want. And that's something that they use for those types of analysis. Notice how Kanab Creek's not a very large number, it's small. And if you come all the way down, well, that's all you need to see on that. If you go on the outside, notice big number right there. That's your cottonwoods. That's how much your cottonwoods, willows, and all that are taking out of your system. And that's a conservative estimate. It can be more, it can be less. And water rights folks don't usually like to see that number, but it takes out a tremendous amount of water out of your system. And it should need to be accounted for. Otherwise, when you come further on down, way down to the 6820, that's how much is flowing out at the gauge. Acre feet per year. So there are other numbers, and they all have significances, but those are kind of interesting numbers to look at. Okay, let's try the next one, please. So, what can we learn from that water budget? Well, first of all, we've learned that this is a very self-contained system, and the system actually is in providing water to the city of Kanab and best friends and the proposed mining well. And it's a self-contained system. It's not this great big thing that's going to come from all over the region. It's right there. And by the way, the side story is we've learned that the city of Moab has a bunch of these too that they used to think were part of the big system. And it turns out the desert does very well. It can provide these little self-contained systems, just like what you've got right here. So we have a history of these all over southern Utah. Total amount of precipitation in there for that time period, 1981 to 2010, that gives you how much precipitation is in there. But notice how much is going out from direct evaporation and not into our system, about 30,000 acre feet. So if there's any way you can catch all that water as rainwater in great big ponds, good luck. But anyway, and the reason why it doesn't balance with the water budget is because there's other ins and outs that get into that. It's not just precipitation and direct evapotranspiration and other things. We talked about consumptive use, so we know your plants are taking much out. But the number that's probably most important to you is right down there, second from the bottom, and that's the recharge of the shallow aquifer. And notice how I include both the quaternary alluvium and the Navajo. They're working together, and we come up with an estimate of about 7,587 acre feet per year for that surrounding area. Okay. And right now, the total municipal, domestic, and agricultural use is about 1,600. Isn't that interesting? Okay? Just give you some numbers on the water budget. Let's try the next slide, please. Here's what really counts, though, and here's what you got to think about. Not only do you have this localized area, which is outlined in the hatches, but really, there's 3 different recharge zones in the system. Where his arrow is, if you look to the right, that's the east zone. And that zone really is not contributing a whole lot, almost nothing, in fact, to the city of Kanab or to the mine well, or to a whole lot of the best friends, a little bit of the best friends. You can see a couple of the springs on the east side, over there by John R. and right in that area right there. Those are getting some of the benefit of that, but that is basically an independent sidearm of the whole system. By comparison, if you look at the west zone, which goes from Kanab Creek right there all the way over to that underflow boundary right there, so that's the watershed boundary. That is really plus the recharge area for the west boundary. Those two are the real recharge functions for the town of Kanab's wells, for most of Desert Springs, for the 3 lakes, for Big Lake, and also for Cave Creek Canyon, that area. All of those, that is the recharge area for that. Okay? So that's no longer that big number. If we look at the next slide, let's try the next slide, we'll see that if we take that turns out to be about 64% of the actual area of this entire little local system. And so by the time we add it all up, we get a certain amount of acre feet, but it's not for this great big area, it's for those about 64% of the areas that we were looking at there. Going down through the numbers and write this, if you add up, therefore, the amount of inflow from the western boundary plus that area right there, we get about 7956 acre feet per year of actual recharge that is accessible to the city of Kanab, best friends, and SRS. So we go on down there then, and if you, it's been suggested a pumping rate of 1,200 acre feet per year might be used. If we take that through there, we are using up about 15% of the recharge per year. Or if you get down further, right, does everybody see where we're going with that? Okay. So that's if we use all of it. Now, if we come down here and we use the upper one is the whole thing. The next number here is the 64%. Then you realize that we take 64%, that's a 51 plus 601, we actually use up about 22% of the recharge per year. The numbers can be either way. It might be more than 22, it might be less than 15, but that's roughly the range we're going to be in terms of looking at how much recharge per year is going to be used. Now, the question is that how fast we're going to use up the system? And the answer is other things happen. Phreatophytes could die, cottonwoods could die, so the ET rate might go down. You might drill a hole deeper. You might take different water from other sources. So there's all sorts of other factors to get in, so you can't necessarily say it's a straight shot. but it gives you something to think about and something to use for modeling efforts for more management. Let's try the next slide, please. Okay. So the effects of pumping, which is the part 3 of this whole thing. What we're worried about then is we think, and this is our next hypothesis that we're working on, we think the stream flows are going to be reduced. Particularly the West Fork, Three Lakes, the Cave Lakes regions, they're going to be the first to see the stream flows reduce quickly due to the springs that are feeding them. Riparian vegetation could disappear in various stream stretches as the water tables go down. Recharge, instead of going into the systems, are going to go to shift to direct runoff. That's going to remove the sand, for example. The springs, the flow will be reduced, or the springs may dry up, depending on where we're located in the landscape. Lakes, particularly the Three Lakes area, may disappear because they're the first ones to see the decline. Wells, particularly the city of Kanab wells, will either have to pump park or be deepened, or they may dry up. And actually, if I were SRS, I would be concerned about the fact that after a period of time, their well may dry up too, given either low Ks or given limited water availability. So these are all effects that we want to start looking at evaluating next. Let's try the next slide, please. So let's see graphically how this might look. So here we're back to the cross section, and this is the pre-development of hydrologic system AA prime. So the very top, right there where the arrow is, that's where the SRS line is, right there. That's the Sitla land. That's the water table. Follow the water table down. And what we want to see is what happens to that spring right there. We want to see what happens to the aquifer that's right next to it, to the right, going to the east. And we want to see what happens to these springs. And ultimately what happens to the best friend springs in that creek. So the next slide shows what we're concerned about. And if we put the well right in here, we'll get a cone of depression. We show, as the USGS has also indicated, a no-flow boundary to the west. So we see the decline goes down there, and to the east we see the decline accordingly along the water table there. Water will be flowing back to the well, and right away you see the spring will dry up, or may dry up. Worried about that. Worried about the alluvial aquifer may decline or disappear. That, of course, with the stream confidence and such, they would go to. And then right there at Three Lakes, we're worried about that. They may be reduced or dry. And then ultimately, further down gradient, best friends springs may be reduced as well in that creek. So that's the scenario we're worried about right there. And that's what we're looking to model next. Let's try the next slide, please. Just for entrance, we went ahead and said what happens if we put in the Lamb's Point aquifer. And this is the basis of this thinking is more on what the USGS has shown in its modeling and what it might do. We don't know what it will do, but this would be our hypothesis. We go after it. And you notice that the black line is the water level in the JNL now, which you know is the Lamb's Point tongue. That's the water level there. And that's an imaginary level. It's not a water table per se. That's an imaginary line that's actually a tension-measured surface. And as we go through it, we can see as it's drawing it down, you can see instead of the circles, which the water would be going into the regional system, the water from that would head for the well. And as it's doing that, it's going to be drawing water maybe through the confining layer. We don't know that. The USGS thinks it does. And they modeled it as such. So that's not just dreaming, that's what they suspect happens. If that is true, then we'll see a decline all the way as far over as the West Fork, the Three Lakes and Three Lakes area. The decline will go all the way back to there for sure. Not sure if it will make it all the way over to Best Friends at that point, because there may be other things that might come into play. So that's if we put the well into the deeper system, and that's the hypothesis we would worry about. Let's try the next slide, please. Here's the pre-development of section BP. This is the section that goes from the north side of the Sitla land all the way over to Big Lake and the Big Lake Springs, and that's what the pre-development would look like. So if we then take the next slide, and if that water level declines because it's being sucked into a cone of depression to the south of it, So the water level will decline. You move along the blue dotted line there, and there's the spring that might go dry, and there's the lake that could go dry. That's their concern. That's right there. And then, of course, that's water that would have gone into Canal Creek, so Canal Creek is also going to decline as well, right there. Notice we're not projecting it moving over to the other side at this point. We don't think that side will be impacted, but we don't know that. As I've told many people, if this was the Colorado River rather than Canal Creek, which is sitting there right there, those dotted lines are right there, Canal Creek, the Colorado River would become the boundary condition, and any decline would go to there, and it would just keep feeding water back into the well. This is Canal Creek. And so Canal Creek probably doesn't have a whole lot of water to feed back. And so if it starts going, if that flow starts reversing and going a different direction, then that boundary condition won't hold a whole lot of hope. And then we might actually see the cone of depression working into the east unit, which is to the right. So these are all hypotheses that we are going to be testing as time goes on. Let's try the next slide, please. So, finally, I mentioned about water quality. Nobody seems to have been talking about that much, but we might as well throw that out as a thing. Since we've done the fracture flow conduits and the flow paths of the system, we're worried, of course, that the flow lines are leading right into the Westport Three Lakes wells, right in which is the city of Kanab, and also eventually maybe into the Three Lakes area proper. So that might be the water quality concern. Of course, the long-term potential contamination of the best friend springs and wells in Canal Creek, and then ultimately we're worried about the potential contamination of Three Lakes and their associated springs and wells. So we haven't really addressed that yet, but our flow line suggests that it's something we need to think about. Okay, let's try the next slide, please. So what's the take-home on all this thing? The first take-home, and this is what's the most important, I think, is that Best Friends in Kanab City and SRS, we're all in the same units. We're all in the Upper Navajo and Bedrock and the Victory Alluvium, and they're all together, along with their hydrostructures. The second thing we need to take home from this is the hydrologic system is local. This is not a big regional system and a big underground flow that's going to come feed this. This is all something that's happening locally, and the water balance is helping us come to that conclusion. Of course, modeling definitely sharpened that. And the system is predominantly recharged by infiltration of precipitation through sand into the bedrock units, as well as infiltration in the dry washes where the fractures are. There are others, but those are the two dominant ways we get water into this system. And the most important thing of the flow system is that most of it, besides being local, is controlled by hydrostructures. And so we have French drains that are hither and yon, and they tend to move contaminants and water very rapidly from A to B. And they're also what any new wells would tend to go for because they're the source of water. They're a much more permeable unit. So that's the first take home from the hydrologic system and the boundary conditions. And the next slide, please. The final take home here from the water budget, besides the fact that now we have some boundary conditions that we can put onto a model, is the water budget is the self-contained system that we've determined in the phase one. And we're all together. I keep stressing that because this is it for all three of us. Recharge of shallow aquifer is about 75, 87 acre feet per year for the whole thing. Okay. Realistically, though, only 64% of the area is servicing the SRS, the City of Kanab, and the Best Friends Wells and Springs. So realistically, that 5,463 acre feet is the real recharge number that we have to worry about. There is a range here, I'm sure, but we're not talking about hundreds of thousands. We're talking about thousands. And if the pump rate is something like 1,200 acre feet per year, the west recharge rate will be reduced by about 22% per year. Okay? Now, that could be compensated for other things, but that's a worst case scenario. And if that's true, the city wells and the Best Friends wells could dry up in as much as 10 years. I would worry more about the fact that the well won't be able to produce the water in the first place. Anyway, that's not a call at this point. We'll see what happens. Meeting over time. Okay, next slide, please. And so there we are. Can I take some questions?
Thank you for your patience. We just heard from Dr. Kenneth Kolm. He was a senior hydrologist hired by the Best Friends Animal Society. Next, we'll hear from Roger Holland, who is a geologist hired by the Kane County Water Conservancy. And with that, I will pass it to you, Mr. Holland. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm Roger Holland. I've lived here since I was 4 years old. And I went to university, I graduated from Dixie State University in 1965 with an AS degree. I graduated University of Utah in 1971 with a BS in geology. I did postgraduate work at the University of Utah. And my experience is over a span of 45 years. And I've primarily done it in exploration for pursuant to minerals, oil and gas, commodities and water, coal, that's another bad word. I have set hundreds of boreholes related to these activities. And I've set a lot of holes. When I say hole, that's a drill hole, and that's related to water and designing water monitoring wells. And I did an assessment of the report that was done for SRS, the very first report. And at that time, I suggested let's cut down on the big volumes of information, and let's go up there and drill a water well and see what happens when we pump it. You know, that's how you tell a real story. Anyway, so I have gone through I read every one of the protest documents that the city got, and plus others that haven't gone through the city. And I've gone through all those and made notes on them to see what I could glean out of it all. The proposed sand mine is economically infeasible. You know, and my question is, are your judgments relevant? Because it's up to me if my proposed grocery store that I want to put on the corner is going to be viable or not. I don't have to have it prove that it's going to be viable to get a permit from the city to do it. SRS does not have, and another thing was, it was mentioned that they don't have all their permits in line. Well, you don't. When you start one of these big projects, you're gathering your permits as you go along. And that's just the way a project works. Everything comes into play as you work through to the end. I simply do not agree with the assumption that Three Lakes and Canal Creek will be impacted. The presence of the amber snail, which wasn't mentioned up here, has been known for years. If its presence is so important, why hasn't the U.S. Fish and Wildlife wanted to propagate them, get them all over the place, put them up and down the canyon? That's the whole idea, is to get it off the threatened and endangered species list, so it doesn't cause problems when we want to do something. More importantly, here's another quote. More importantly, if the application is approved, impairment of nearby water rights is a foregone conclusion. Oh, give me a break. That's not true. It is not a foregone conclusion. I wonder if Best Friends Animal Sanctuary's wells across the highway from West Canyon Wells, number 1, are they being impacted? No. As per Jake Dutton, he's the Kanab City Public Works Director. The Westport wells, 1 through 5, do not experience drawdown when they pump them. And they're pretty much right next to each other compared to those wells. Number 6 well, the farthest one to the west, is 2.88 miles from SRS. So their wells, they're not drawing down on best friends. Canal City has been pumping water for many years in and around Three Lakes Canyon. Three Lakes are still there. Is that growing on anybody? Wonder what best friend's daily water consumption is, and what effect does this production have on their springs and seeps that are down gradient from their wells? I don't know. This gentleman indicated that there was some study done of that. Now, like I said, I've read all the protests and all that, and then sometimes I begin to wonder if the burr about this project is really water, and it's not the word frack. If that's what's causing the problem. Because people tend to believe that fracking is some horrible thing, which it is really not. It's really not. One major thing that this fracking has done is made America energy independent. I live in Johnson Canyon. Used to live in Kanab, but I live in Johnson Canyon, and I have 2 wells. I own 2 wells. One is to keep our house culinary water, and the other one is to do water our fields. We raise about 17 acres a day, and that well there produces about 150 gallons a minute. And 150 feet away from that is our well for the culinary water for the house. We're not experiencing any problems with that. Now, up and down Johnson Canyon, there are numerous wells, as you saw on his slides, and people up there aren't experiencing any problems. We've got right across the road from me, about a half mile away, is Simmon Johnson's well that they water 50 acres of alfalfa. We're not bothering each other. So, what is it we're fighting about, really? Why have we had so many people? I've read all the information I could find, and we're having people that are literally throwing rocks at each other and trying to hurt their what do you call it, character assassination over this here. I don't think we shouldn't be doing that, people. Working at people. Just working at. We don't want to fight. It's like a family fight over things. We've got to come to an agreement, and what will work and what won't work. I see somebody back there thinking I must be a nutcase, but that's okay. That's basically all I've got to say, is this is not going to affect anything. It isn't. In this story.
Is that all?
That's in my story.
Okay.